This podcast contains our own personal views not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. Hi everyone, welcome back to today's episode of Coronial. My name's Emma.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Georgie.
So today we're going to be looking back at an older inquest, which I usually don't do, but this one was an interesting one. We're looking at the death of Brian G., who was also known as Abel Dallas, who passed away on the 16th of December 2000 in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory. This inquest was held on the 5th and 6th of September 2001, and the report was released on the 15th of October 2001. So obviously
the report was released like a month later?
Yeah.
That's quick.
Very quick turnaround back in the early 2000s in the NT, apparently.
Maybe they just didn't have many that we're investigating.
Well, yeah, I was going to say they also have so many less than every other state.
Yeah, it is.
Because it's just not as populated, right?
Yeah. So obviously this is an older inquest, so the findings and recommendations here are actually not really that relevant in today's society, and it will become very evident to you why that's the case.
Okay.
As we get into things. But that said, I thought it was an interesting case almost because of that. So obviously this death happened over 23 years ago now, and for me, like, reading this report was interesting because it shows how much things have changed even in that space of time, and how like society has evolved with technology and through globalization and like different world events.
Okay.
And how that kind of changes our perception of things. That's why I put the dates in at the start so people could start tracking.
Yeah.
The important things that happened between when the death occurred and when the inquest was released.
Yes.
Because it's relevant. When I was reading this inquest, I was sort of just like, how did all of this happen? And I'm sure that people listening to this will also think, like, how was this allowed to happen? Because, like, everything back then seems to be so much more relaxed than what it is
Security
today.
was less of a thing.
Yeah, that's right. And that's because the world is so different now.
Yeah.
Like, the world has changed so much between 2000 and 2024. And so will very much be, you read this report or listen to this episode through a 2024 lens and you sort of realize, oh, so much has changed since 2000. And then you sort of think about, well, how about the different things that we hear about happening now that we're reading about now? Like, will we look back in 20 years' time and be like, how did we let that happen? Like, how is that not regulated back in 2024? So I don't know, it just sort of made me think of all of that. But anyway, I also do want to flag that this inquest does involve discussions surrounding mental illness. I haven't focused too much on the details. Firstly, because it's not hugely, I mean, it is relevant to the case, but like the specific details we don't really need to get into. But also because even the language in this report is quite outdated.
Oh, yeah.
Like the terminology that's used. So I've tried to change the terminology where best I can, but in some cases I can't without it potentially like changing the accuracy of what the report's trying to say. So please, everyone, just bear that in mind when you're listening to today's episode. But that said, let's get stuck into it. So as I said, we'll be looking at the inquest into the death of Brian G., which occurred in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory. We'll get into Brian's background a little bit later, but we'll start off with going through the incident that led to his death. So at some time prior to dawn, on the morning of Saturday the 16th of December 2000, most likely around 4:30 a.m., Brian illegally entered the general aviation area at the Alice Springs airport. It's not clear how Brian accessed the airport, but he could have done so in one of two ways. Either he climbed a security fence, so the fence was 2.4 metres high and was topped with 3 strands of barbed wire.
Ouch.
Or he could have manipulated a coded keypad that controlled a gate in the fence.
So just mashed numbers.
Mashed numbers, or maybe he had the security key somehow. He'd observed someone else.
Watched
someone else putting it in and knew the key code. Then he must have closed it behind him because there was no evidence that any gates were open or anything like that. But
or maybe the code was 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Because that seems standard for 2000.
Yeah. It's 2000 technology. So once Brian gained access to the general aviation area, he was able to enter the cabin of a single-engine Piper Warrior airplane. This plane was owned by the Alice Springs Aero Club. The cabin of the plane was not locked.
Obviously.
It was in a hangar occupied by the Alice Springs Aero Club, and at the time, the door of the hangar was open.
As you do.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I get that most people feel like they don't necessarily need to lock up their plane.
I didn't
'Cause,
realise
like-
you could, to be honest.
Yeah, they do have sheds
Okay.
or hangars.
No, I mean, like, you can't lock the plane, though, can you?
But, like, not even shutting the door to
Yeah.
where you're
To me,
storing
shutting
your
the
plane.
Door
Like,
makes
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
sense.
It's not like a car where you
Yeah,
just
you
like
can't
press a
just-
button and boop, boop, and it like locks the plane. But also that technology didn't exist in 2000.
Yeah.
how do you even get to the cockpit without a flight of stairs? Like,
Yeah, true.
These planes would have been very small.
Right,
so it
so
would
you
have been
just,
quite
like,
low.
step
so
into
you-
it.
Yeah, I think with those smaller planes, it's literally like you just kick out
Yeah, the
little
the
stairs
stairs,
the
or
stairs and
whatever.
you just walk around. It's like 2 or 3 steps.
Yeah,
It's kind of
okay.
like getting into a truck.
Yeah, okay.
They're not very high off the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, the concept of not locking the hangar,
Yeah. You didn't even bother shutting the door.
not even shutting the door.
Yeah,
like
no,
the door
even if
was
the door
open.
wasn't locked, but it was closed.
Yeah. It's just like, nah,
Yeah.
not
should be
necessary.
right.
It's a plane.
Mm.
He's going to steal a plane.
So Brian was able to start the engine of the plane with a key that he had in his possession.
Wait, what?
We'll get into it.
I know, this one's just like absolutely what on earth? How?
Exactly. That's why I put the caveat at the
Yep.
start, because you're like, 2024, this would never happen.
Or like if someone did in 2024, I would just be like,
It wouldn't.
Well done.
props to them.
It wouldn't happen
Yeah,
because
no one would be able to get into the
no one would be
airport,
able to
right?
get to the
Yeah.
airport. So Brian was able to start the engine of the plane with the key that he had in his possession. The lock on the ignition of the plane was not of a sophisticated manufacture, and a person with some skill in manipulating locks would have been able to defeat the lock with the right kind of substitute key. So it wasn't necessarily the key for that
Right.
plane, but the plane wasn't sophisticated in terms of
So he's just got his house key and he's like, this'll
not
work.
quite,
Yeah.
not quite his house key, but he's just got another key
Yeah,
and he's been
right.
able to use it. And
Wow.
it started the plane. It's concerning.
I like that he thought to bring a key with him, or he had a key on his possession, but I guess he could have found it within the hangar as well. But like,
We'll
Yeah.
get into how. Well, we don't really get into how he got the key, but there's some theories about how he got the key
Okay,
and some
okay.
of these other things. Brian had never held a pilot's license. He had never, to anyone's knowledge, ever had formal flying lessons. That said, Brian was able to maneuver the aircraft onto the main runway of Alice Springs Airport. As it was early morning, the airport was not in use at that time, but the landing lights in the airport were kept on just in case of an emergency. So Brian was able to follow the landing lights on
on a runway.
the runway and take off.
I've never flown a plane, so I honestly don't think I would be able to figure it out.
But yeah, I'm just imagining the cockpit and they're just being like sticky notes or like, you know, this is how you turn it
Go
on, and then
on.
and this is like forward, and this is take off. You know,
I will say, and we'll get into this, but he does have at least some familiarity with planes, even though he doesn't have a license and he's never taken formal flying lessons.
okay, he's got some.
He's got some familiarity.
Okay, so it's better than Alice and I trying to get in a plane and take off.
So Brian was able to manipulate the throttle of the aircraft to full thrust, which would have increased the plane's lift enough to get airborne without any further input from Brian at the controls. So obviously you just need to pull the throttle to full thrust and it's enough to,
it's enough to just
in
go.
this particular plane at this particular time.
Happy days, off you
Yep,
take.
That's what you need to do. So once airborne, Brian likely would have experienced visual disorientation in the pre-dawn darkness. He also had no visual cues from the ground to guide him. He would have not known where the horizon was and therefore would not have known if he was going up or down.
So he was just in space, essentially. Like he was in the air, but
Weird question. How do pilots normally get their bearings of where
I
they
think
are?
there are particular controls in the cockpit. Like there's one of those horizon monitors that you do have
Right.
that like show where the horizon is.
Okay.
Again, I don't
Yeah.
know what the technology was like
Geez.
back then, but I would assume it would still be there. in some form. But there's definitely technology now where there's horizon and it also like tells you like how far away you are from the ground and things like that.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't have known how to use any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's just
Flying blind.
literally flying blind, like has no idea. And like when you say you wouldn't know if you're flying up or down, you would think that you'd be able to feel it. But again, I don't know how much of that is like sight linked as well.
Yeah, and I think that would really depend on how quickly you're ascending or descending.
Yeah.
Like if you were just very gradually going down, I don't think you would necessarily notice it.
I'd assume so. And again, like how much of that is also linked. Like when you're in an airplane, obviously you can't see necessarily, but you can feel.
Yeah, fair.
Because you just don't visually know. You're not oriented to like where you're at. So apparently when aircraft are operating under full engine power, which is necessary for takeoff, so it needs to be on full engine power to take off, the plane is subject to a torque effect where it pulls the plane to the left and downwards.
Oh.
So obviously like an experienced pilot knows you have to compensate
Yes.
on takeoff. So
I can't imagine Brian knew that.
Brian did not know that.
No.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, he obviously didn't know how to compensate for that effect. So it seems that after takeoff, after reaching a height of approximately 106 meters above the ground, the aircraft assumed a downward flight path and banked steeply to the left,
Okay.
colliding with the ground approximately 2 kilometers away from the edge of the runway.
Yeah. Was that still within the airport?
It didn't say. Like any airport, there's going to be a large like apron around the airport of nothing, but it's probably not in the like aerodrome kind of.
Yeah. No, yeah, I was thinking of like what surrounds, but then I remembered nothing surrounds Alice Springs Airport anyway.
Before impact, the plane's left wingtip struck a tree and separated from the fuselage. The propeller struck another tree and the aircraft impacted the ground in a nose-down position. The force of the collision ejected Brian from the cabin and he was thrown 500 meters from the wreck of the cabin. The aircraft then caught fire.
I assume there's seatbelts in a
Yeah,
cockpit?
there would be. You'd have a harness.
Presumably he wasn't wearing one.
Yeah.
There's no evidence to say that he was.
Yeah, okay.
And the fact that he got ejected.
Yeah.
It suggests he definitely wasn't. Yeah, fair.
Yeah, I would say he wasn't. A key was found in the ignition of the wreckage. It was not the authorized key.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's good to know that they didn't leave the key in the
didn't leave
plane.
the key.
Even though they left the hangar open and the plane unlocked, they didn't leave the key in the ignition. Good to know.
No. So that's basically the incident of what happened and what led to Brian's death. And I'm sure everyone's got the question, so how?
And why?
So we'll get now into a little bit of Brian's background. Brian was a 24-year-old man with a long history of serious mental health issues. In 1995, he was diagnosed with chronic schizophrenia. From that point onwards, he was admitted to multiple mental health facilities in Perth, Melbourne, and Sydney. So he was originally from Perth, where he lived with his mother, but he was known to abscond and travel quite far distances around Australia. His illness was characterised by treatment resistance, absconding from care, non-compliance, and violence. He had delusions that were often centred on religious themes. So he'd had a number of admissions to psychiatric care, but we'll start from his admission to the psychiatric ward at Alice Springs on the 23rd of March 2000. So
Okay, that's a number of months before, though.
a number of months before.
Yeah.
So this was a voluntary admission and he was discharged the next day.
Oh. That
It was a
okay.
short-
I was expecting a longer period of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was just a day admission. It's not clear how or why Brian came to be in Alice Springs, but after his discharge, he camped out around the area, just in Alice Springs. During this time, he became increasingly fixated with airplanes and had a persistent delusion that once on a plane, he would be able to fly the plane to God. In March 2000, the Alice Springs Aero Club was offering to members of the public the opportunity to take part in a trial instruction flight. So this was a short flight intended to let the participant get a feel for flying and whether they might be interested in taking flying lessons.
This is totally a early 2000s thing
Yeah.
that I'm like would not exist today, right?
I know.
Just come like, yeah, no
Yeah,
worries.
and it literally says participants were able to take the plane through some basic flying maneuvers under close supervision.
That is a flying lesson. Like,
No, it's just an instructional flight. Like, come and try.
a come and try flight would be you sit there and you touch nothing.
Come and try day for planes. I love it. Can you imagine the insurance costs now, though?
Oh, no.
Because, like, just how could you trust someone to not be like, what does this do? And just, like, wrench on the, like, throttle. Turns out it wasn't that hard to fly a plane. Sorry, it wasn't that hard to take a plane off. Apparently, once you're in the air, it does.
There's some skill required to actually fly the plane properly. But, yeah, to actually take off.
Surprisingly easy.
We've got to remember we're looking at this through a different lens.
Yeah.
Now it might be more difficult. There might be some more checks and balances you have to do to be actually able to physically take off.
There's a button that says, are you actually a pilot? And you do have to turn that one on.
It's not just a big button saying take off.
Yeah.
So on the 31st of March 2000, after he had been discharged from hospital, Brian took part in one of these trial flights.
Okay, so he did go on it. Okay.
Yes. The flight was actually in the same Piper Warrior aircraft in which he had the accident.
And I wonder if, like, he sought out that same plane.
Potentially.
Yeah.
So Brian took another trial flight on the 11th of May.
Excellent.
2000 with a different instructor, but again in the same Piper Warrior aircraft. So he's familiar with this aircraft at this point.
Okay.
He was said to have been acting strangely during that flight.
Because we know he's got treatment-resistant schizophrenia.
Yes.
That means that I think there is a high likelihood that anyone that has treatment-resistant schizophrenia with delusions is going to be acting differently to the rest of the population. Yeah.
So at some point during the evening of the 15th of May, 2000, Brian unlawfully entered the Royal Flying Doctor hangar at the Alice Springs Airport. He broke a window to gain entry to an office. The senior pilot found him hiding under a desk. Police arrested him and he was transferred to a secure unit at the Royal Darwin Hospital. So this occurred in Alice Springs, but he was transferred up to Darwin.
Oh, right.
For anyone that's not familiar, like Darwin and Alice Springs are like 1,000 kilometers, probably.
I mean, the opposite ends of the state, right?
Yeah, Alice Springs is in the centre of Australia and Darwin's right up the top north. So, like, it's not a close transfer. While in the secure ward at the hospital in Darwin, Brian absconded on a number of occasions, most notably on the 15th of June 2000, where he was discovered by police in an aircraft owned by a small airline at Darwin Airport.
Oh my God, how many aircrafts has he been in?
Many now.
Unlawfully.
But also, you said the word secure ward, and then yet he was able to break out and find a plane? That's not a very secure ward.
And how far away is this airport from, like, wherever he was securely
I would say
housed?
A few kilometres at the very least.
I presume it's not next door.
No, I would assume not. So, yeah, he somehow made his way
to another airport.
So he'd illegally entered the aircraft and had started one of the two engines before he was apprehended.
Wow.
I'm glad he got apprehended at that point, but so confused. And was this a similar type aircraft that he kind of knew?
Oh, this is obviously a two-engine aircraft.
Yeah,
whereas the one
different.
It was a different aircraft type.
Yeah.
So the police returned him to the ward and they didn't end up laying any charges.
Seems fair.
Yeah.
On the 10th of August 2000, while on a walk with a nurse in the grounds of the Darwin Hospital, Brian absconded and he did not return.
Don't let him walk around the grounds if he is known to abscond.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing. But still.
It's also hard, like, how much freedoms do you take away from people?
Yeah.
When it's obviously not their fault, but like...
But he's known to abscond. So like at that point you probably should take away his freedoms.
And he's known to abscond and he's known to abscond with delusions about flying planes.
Yeah.
So an order was issued for his involuntary return to the hospital, but the order lapsed on the 6th of September 2000 and no further orders were made or attempted.
Was he involuntarily admitted
at that point? So, because
Yeah.
it's after he's just been returned from being found in the cockpit of the plane.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
So on the 10th of August 2000, so the same day that he absconded, a discharge summary was placed on Brian's file. The summary made several notes regarding Brian's fixation with planes, including that he may try to access other airports in the Northern Territory, including Katherine, Tennant Creek and Alice Springs. Again, they didn't talk about outside of the Northern Territory, probably because of the scope of their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're just concerned about the Northern Territory. In September 2000, Brian's care team in Darwin became aware that Brian was now in Alice Springs, as Brian had phoned his mother in Perth, telling her that he was in Alice Springs, that he was off his medication, and that he planned to fly to God. So Brian's mother immediately contacted Brian's mental health team in Darwin.
At which point I don't know why they didn't then put out another involuntary order for him.
I'm not quite sure either.
Because it seems like they didn't do anything with that information.
No, they did.
Oh, okay.
So the Darwin mental health team contacted the Alice Springs unit, and together they formulated a plan to contact all places in Alice Springs that offered flying lessons and alert them that Brian may try to enroll.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems fair.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
So the police were also made aware.
Also
as well.
seems fair.
The coroner also noted that the police did deal with Brian on a number of occasions, so they were familiar with him.
Okay.
They knew who he was.
Yeah.
Because he was camping around town and acting.
Alice has only got even now a population of 20,000 people, so it's not a very big place.
After this time, none of the mental health teams heard from Brian again, and as a result, he was formally discharged from their care.
Wait, so you can just disappear, not contact them, and they're like, well, you must be fine.
I mean,
but what
not
do you
necessarily
do?
you must be fine, but there's also a finite amount of resource they can expend on him trying to, do something about it. But I am surprised that if he was known to the police that the next time they saw him, he didn't then get collected and known that he should have been an involuntary admission, so that they just then wheel him straight back to whatever centre and he gets involuntarily admitted.
Yeah.
Or at least assessed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has some sort of intervention.
Yeah. If the police never actually caught up with him in that period of time, then
they
what
just
do you
said
do?
they don't say that there was any specific instances of the police being involved. It was just that they were aware of who he was. So sometime after absconding from Darwin, although the actual date is unknown, Brian again contacted the Alice Springs Aero Club to arrange a third instruction flight under the name Luke Fernando. So he did use his name. So the trial flight was conducted.
Excellent.
And was conducted by, again, a different pilot than the first two.
Right.
And again was in that Piper Warrior aircraft. The instructor took the plane aloft but became concerned about Brian's behaviour in the aircraft as he appeared to be in a trance-like state. The instructor was concerned enough to terminate the flight early and return to the ground.
Seems fair.
And did that make Brian upset in any way? Did it describe any kind of...
They didn't say anything about how he acted. A few weeks later, Brian again contacted the Alice Springs Aero Club requesting a trial flight, but the call taker recognised his voice and refused the request.
Oh.
Which, unfortunately, I feel then potentially would have prompted that, I'll just go steal it myself.
Yeah.
It's that hard balance, right, of if he'd just been continued to have the trial flights.
The risk would have been astronomical to the company.
Don't get me wrong, there's no safety for those pilots that were going with him.
If I was a pilot, I'd no way.
Exactly, agreed, 100%. But I'm just could there have been a different intervention where yes, come along, and then the moment he gets there, he is then, again, taken for mental health assessment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
I feel there was a point of intervention that was possible.
Yeah, possibly missed a few times. So evidence was also heard that while in Alice Springs, Brian became close friends with another man. He had apparently shown the man an aircraft key which he kept around his neck. Brian had told the man that he had stolen the key from a plane in Darwin.
So that first time that he...
Yeah.
Right.
That time that he was in Darwin, he's probably even though it was a different type of aircraft, he's probably stolen that key, and it's close enough similarity that it works.
And again, with the when he was apprehended by the police in the airport that he had broken into,
was that key not taken away from him?
Yeah.
Again, this is obviously evidence that's been given by a person who also has mental health issues, and it's also what Brian told him.
Yeah.
So we really don't know.
He could have stolen it when he went for one of those trial flights.
Yes.
Yeah, true.
We really don't know if that's what happened. Yeah. But that's the only logical explanation
as to how he got
or the only
aircraft
evidence
key.
At all of how he had the aircraft key, because there was an aircraft key that was found in the ignition, but it wasn't the aircraft key for that aircraft.
Yep.
But it still worked.
Yep.
It still blows my mind.
Yeah. So the Piper Warrior aircraft was last flown on the day before the accident. The pilot refueled the plane after that flight because he wanted to be ready first thing in the morning for a flying instruction. He left the aircraft in the hangar, and neither the aircraft or the hangar were locked, as we've already.
But he did refuel it.
So it was refueled, ready to go. The Alice Springs Airport itself is surrounded by a security fence, and entry through that fence is gained through locked gates, which are controlled by the code keypads, as we've already discussed. So at the time, and I don't know if this is still the case in terms of the different departments that are responsible for certain things, but at the time, and I'm sure it's changed because of September 11th, but at the time, the Federal Department of Transport and Regional Development Aviation and Security Branch categorised the security measures required at airports within Australia according to the size of the aircraft and the number of passengers using the airport. So Alice Springs was classified as a Category 3 airport, which meant the airport owners were required to provide full security for airline passengers and cargo. Basically, what I interpret this as is the airport was responsible for the security. The Alice Springs Aero Club was not really responsible for the security of its own aircraft.
Right.
So the fact that they left their hangar open doesn't matter because the airport should have been secured.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which it was.
Yeah.
So in terms of the Category 3 airport, this included a requirement for a locked security fence to surround the aerodrome. However, Category 3 airports were not required to have 24-hour security service. So there's no requirement for there to be physical security people there.
It's a pretty small airport. I'd be surprised if there was even a 24-hour security now.
There'd at least be CCTV that's manned.
Oh, yeah, true.
Which is still 24 hours security.
Fair.
So when the pilot left the airport in the early evening, everything seemed normal to him at the hangar, and he locked the only known key to the aircraft's ignition in his office. So that key was securely locked away.
Yeah.
Then obviously the accident happened. Then following the accident, just describe how the actual aircraft was located.
Yep.
So the Piper Warrior was fitted with an emergency locator transmitter, which is also known as an ELT, which basically is a distress beacon used in aircraft to show its location. So ELTs are usually activated by shock, and they'll generate a signal which can be detected at certain radio frequencies. So the organisation responsible for responding to all reports in respect of activations of ELTs in Australia was at the time, I don't know if it's changed, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, specifically its operations section, the Australian Search and Rescue Centre, known as AUSSAR. So it's not only for aircraft, but also for maritime.
Yeah, I'm like,
yeah.
But that's the ocean.
They're sort of responsible for anywhere within Australia or Australia's maritime area. AUSSAR manages the Rescue Coordination Centre, or the RCC. So the RCC is the place that receives notifications of the distress signals that are received.
Yeah, which is the distress signal that was received in the episode for Michael Wilson when he fell in the canyon as well.
Right, okay.
They set off the EPIRB that went to the RCC as well.
Yeah, okay. So like it's
all of those
done
emergency.
by the RCC.
Yep.
So at 5 a.m. on the 16th of December 2000, there was an alert detected on a radio frequency which was transmitted to the RCC, which was received at 5:05 a.m., which again, like, it took them 5 minutes to receive the signal, which is just...
Oh, yeah.
But they would have been so far away from Alice Springs.
True, they were in Melbourne.
Yeah.
True. But, like, it still just seems wild that it took that long. I don't know.
I don't think the 5 minutes was going to change the outcome.
No, it wasn't going to change the outcome.
Not in this case, but it might have in some other case.
Yeah.
Yeah. At that time, the signal gave 2 positions for the ELT, which were positions that were approximately 2,000 kilometres apart.
That's not enough. Like that's not...
That's not helpful at all.
No, that's not what you need to know for this. And, like, were those 2,000 kilometre locations anywhere near where the actual
I think there was one that was close to Alice Springs. It didn't actually say where those 2,000 those 2 locations were. No. So a request was made by the RCC to the Flight Information Manager of Air Service Australia's Air Traffic Service Centre in Melbourne to monitor those radio frequencies in the vicinity of those 2 positions. At 6:47 a.m, a Singapore Airlines flight travelling at a height of 37,000 feet in the vicinity of Alice Springs detected an interrupted signal from the ELT beacon. but because of the height of the aircraft, it could not determine the location of the beacon. So from that, they kind of knew that it was
around that area,
around
at
the
least.
Alice Springs area.
So you're saying that like the beacon is not specifically linked to a specific aircraft, or there's no way of determining what specific aircraft it's come from?
I don't think at that time. It's just like it just gets picked up by a satellite.
Yeah.
And then it's zipped around. And
I hope technology has changed since then, so you can be like,
Surely.
this is coming from XYZ plane. Let's get in contact with whoever.
At 7:10 a.m., an operations officer at the Alice Springs Airport was contacted by the RCC and asked to see if he could hear any signals on the relevant frequency. So the operator couldn't hear anything on the frequency, so he began driving around the aprons of the airport with a handheld radio. So 2000.
That is so 2000s.
Yes. At which point he noticed a plane on the ground.
No, he didn't.
Oh, he didn't?
No, because
It was outside. That's
It was
right.
2 kilometers away.
So he was still not able to detect any signal.
Oh,
Wow.
that's
from
concerning.
this handheld radio. Yeah. So sometime after 7 a.m., the Aero Club pilot became aware that the Piper Warrior was missing.
Yes.
That's what
When
we're
you turned up to work, yep.
Yeah. At 7:15 a.m., he contacted the Alice Springs Control Tower and the police.
Seems fair.
At 8:05 a.m., a further position was transmitted to the RCC in respect of the ELT, approximately 10 kilometres east of the Alice Springs Airport. As a result of this signal, even though that seems like a little bit too far,
But it's a lot closer than
it was a
2,000
lot closer than
kilometres.
2,000 kilometres. But as a result of this signal, the police were able to locate the wreckage at about 8:21 a.m.
That's still so much longer than I thought it would take to find a plane.
It's
To
about,
find a plane?
that's what, 3.5 hours after he crashed?
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, they didn't know for a very long time that the plane had crashed because there was no one around.
Well, I know,
No,
but,
but
like,
they knew at 5 a.m. that something was wrong.
something was up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
They knew at 5 a.m. that there was a signal going off somewhere in the vicinity of Northern Territory.
Somewhere in Australia, a plane has crashed.
Well, but I mean, because they didn't know
Although
it crashed.
not a plane
They just
necessarily.
It's something.
There's a distress signal
Signal
coming from
from
sort of-
something.
and it's probably
thing.
not a boat because it's in Alice
Because it's on land.
Springs.
Yeah.
Well, one location was in Alice
Yeah,
Springs. You
true.
don't know where the
The
other
other
one
one
could have
was.
been in the water for all we know.
Excellent.
Yeah. So they were all the facts that were considered by the coroner in relation to this case. Let's summarise. Brian's history and mental health issues, including the actions of the mental health services, or the lack
Thereof.
of actions. Yep. The security at the Alice Springs Airport.
Was, I mean, technically
It was
secure.
technically
but
as-
it wasn't that hard to break into.
That's
Yep.
right. And also the locating of the wreckage, which we've just been through.
Yeah.
So turning to the coroner's matters for comments and recommendations, first of all, looking at the actions of the police and mental health services. So unsurprisingly, the coroner was quite scathing of the fact that Brian was able to abscond from an involuntary order and that nothing was done to try and return him, even though it was abundantly clear that Brian had a dangerous obsession with planes.
Yeah.
And that you said it was supposedly a secure unit. You know, like if
Correct.
he'd involuntarily absconded from somewhere that wasn't specifically designed to be secure for those patients that needed a secure facility, then I would have been less upset with their actions, you know?
Yeah, I think the coroner said something about like it's just making a mockery of the purpose of involuntary orders or something like that. He was not happy
Yeah.
at
And
all.
he'd also, like, yes, he had these delusions, but he was also acting on them.
Yes.
Like, it's not that he just had a delusion and,
He had no insight
Yeah.
into the inappropriateness of his actions, yeah.
and he was actively trying
Yeah.
to get a plane.
And even when he called his mum, he's like, I'm going to fly to God. Like,
Yeah.
so it was still ongoing and still
Yeah.
a problem.
So it was also known to the NT mental health authorities that Brian was in the Alice Springs area, that he was unmedicated, and that he had a history of entering airports and knew how to start planes.
Yeah, right. That is extra information because, yeah, most people aren't just going to be able to get into an aircraft
No,
and off they
that's
go.
right.
Yeah.
And on top of that, like obviously the NT mental health authorities knew that, but the police were also aware.
And I mean, and the flight company were aware.
The flight company.
Because again,
aware.
with the like, if they knew that someone was trying to steal a plane, they should have locked their hangar.
But again, that wasn't their responsibility, remember? It was Alice Springs Airport's responsibility.
I know,
to secure the airport.
But again, with the like, just go that extra step because you know there's someone trying to steal a plane and he specifically targeted your company and been in your plane. He'd been in that specific plane
three times.
On three separate occasions.
Yeah.
And I get the dude was like, yeah, but I locked my key up. But still, just lock the plane up if you can't get the plane out.
Yeah, but like he could have potentially with his other key unlocked the plane as well if you can lock a plane. But yeah, if the hangar was locked, then
if the hangar was locked, that's that extra step that he had to go through.
Yeah, that's right. So the coroner found that despite all this knowledge by everyone, the response between the authorities, though well-intentioned, remember they tried to contact, he just said it was on a very ad hoc basis. There were very few exchanges of information between the two services, being the police and the mental health authorities, and there was no coordinated management plan in place.
Yeah.
They were just like, we know all of this, but
whatevs.
We're not going to do anything really about it. I mean, we've contacted the different flying instruction schools and let them know. But even then, that didn't work because Brian was still able to get a trial flight.
Yeah.
Using
a different name.
Yeah. So,
I'm surprised they didn't have a photo, like, because he changed his name. I initially was like, yeah, but would they not have had a photographic ID with his name so that then when... What did he use? What was it? When Fernando showed up, you go, Fernando, you look a lot like Brian.
Yeah, and the issue was it was a different instructor that had never seen him before. So, yeah. But you're right. If they had a photo, then he would have been like, wait a second.
Yeah.
But were they even checking IDs for these people who were...
I don't know.
I mean, obviously not, because presumably Brian wasn't getting a fake ID that says Fernando for his trial flight.
No.
That's true. So, no, they probably weren't even checking ID. The coroner noted that the sensitivities of sharing personal information about patients, so sort of like I understand that there's issues, especially surrounding mental health and sharing personal information, but he submitted that the police should be briefed in a formal and systemized way by mental health services to allow for the joint formulation of a management plan for the recovery of absconded patients. Which seems kind of common sense, but anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
With this in mind, the coroner recommended that senior officers within the NT Police meet with relevant officials within the Territory Health Services with a view to creating a joint protocol to deal with the following issues. 1, the nature of information which should be exchanged between the services. 2, the level within each organisation in which information should be shared, so like at what seniority. 3, the form in which this information should be shared, so whether they should just have a quick phone call or whether like something formal and written up about a patient's mental health issues or otherwise that needs to be exchanged. And 4thly, the circumstances in which management plans should be mandated. So for people who frequently are known to abscond or whatever the particular criteria is. So it just sounds like there was none of this in place of that. There was no sort of management protocol for when a person does abscond, how do you deal with it? There's nothing in place.
And I get a lot of that comes like potentially, sorry, it's occurred to me of like confidentiality, that like there would have been a lot of concern around that, but I think it becomes acceptable when there is that risk of harms to others, which we think, you know, he actively wasn't talking about wanting to harm people, but getting in a plane does give a huge risk.
It's lucky he didn't hurt anyone else. Yeah.
And I guess there's a huge risk he was going to harm himself, which is another thing that we should, you know, that he's allowed to be worried about. And does allow those breaches of confidentiality when you need the police to pick him up or, you know, to know that he's around and at risk.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
And I'm assuming like these days there's probably pretty strict protocols in place of what happens when a patient absconds from a mental health unit. Moving on to the security of the airport, the evidence given by the operations manager of the Alice Springs Airport was that the level of security at the airport was in excess of what was required by the law.
Oh, wow.
In fact, the 2.4 metre high security fence topped with 3 strands of barbed wire was considerably higher than what was required by government legislation.
Like, I have
so
some
Alice
worries.
Springs Airport was going above and beyond.
Good on them.
Well, I think it's just also like putting in a point in time again. Remember the dates. So this inquest was heard the 5th and 6th of September 2001. and he handed it down on the 15th of October, 2001. In the interim was when September 11th had happened.
Yeah.
Can you imagine writing this report and being like, the 2.4 meter high fence was in excess
of requirements.
Of what was required by law.
Yeah.
But like 2.4 meters.
Yeah, it's all J.
All good. This guy broke into a plane.
Yeah.
All good.
All good, no
But yeah,
worries.
the security was fine.
It's technically to our legislation.
Yeah, it's to our legislation, so it's all G. So for those reasons, the coroner declined to make any criticism of the level of security at the Alice Springs Airport, which you just think would have just been so hard to like bite your tongue, just in the backdrop of what would have been happening.
Yeah,
in
and
the
like
world.
he would have been thinking this dude could have gone, and if he'd managed to keep that plane in the air, the damage could have been so much worse.
2.4 high meter fence, it's just wild that was okay. And like we were alive back then and we were flying around in planes.
Yeah.
Back then when that was okay.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where I said at the start, like it's things that happen in society that develop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our technology and our changes in social norms and what is and what isn't normal. And back in those days, that was completely fine.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't have ever imagined that anything, they wouldn't have can you imagine like 2000 you coming into today's society? I mean, like, why do we have to go through all these weird airport things?
Why can't I take liquids onto the plane?
Yeah. Oh my God,
I don't understand.
Why can't I take my scissors onto the plane with me?
But yeah, as I said, the coroner declined to make any criticism of the airport security. And finally, in relation to the response of Ozstar to the ELT, the coroner also declined to make any criticisms of the RCC's response to the ELT, noting the response was appropriate given the level of technology that was available at the time, which was pretty limited.
Yeah. But not much you can do if that is what exists at the time.
No, that's exactly right.
Okay.
So,
because I'm like 2,000 kilometers away from each other is suboptimal.
It's not great. And it was interesting because so this particular coroner is the same coroner that's been the NT coroner for all of the coroner's reports from the NT that
since the 2000s
reported on. And he's usually like a little bit more with his recommendations. He'll be like, well, this was inadequate, so like we need to find a way to fix it. Whereas in this one, he was just like, apart from the obvious ones in relation to the mental health response, he was sort of just like, oh, well, the technology wasn't there, so what can we do about it? Whereas like in future reports, I think he would have been a little bit more like, what could we do next time? But again, this is written in the backdrop of September 11th, so he might have been like, well, change is coming.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think the time just made it the reason why not much was done? Because things were going to change either way.
And it's also just like interesting to read like a coroner's report from the same coroner from, 25 years apart.
True.
And how they change in their views.
It very much seems like that report was pumped out as soon as absolutely possible.
Yeah.
Because of the events of September 11th?
Don't know. There was no commentary about September 11th at all in the report. I just noticed from the day. And obviously like reading the report and seeing that it was about an aircraft being stolen and then looking at the date, because you just be like, that would never happen now.
Yeah.
And then being like, okay, so that happened 2000, so pre-September 11th, and then just being like, oh, I wonder when the inquest was handed down. Oh shit, okay. It was literally handed down like a month after September 11th happened. That's interesting. But there was no commentary about it.
But surely, because I've never seen one turn around that quickly.
Yeah. I'm guessing there was no commentary because the inquest itself was held before. So, like, all of the evidence and everything. The coroner
could still put stuff in there about it.
Yeah, I suppose so.
But also...
fair.
At that time, it wasn't relevant.
No, that's right. And
to
also,
the death.
like, at that time, it's only a month out from September 11th.
And so a lot of the information was still coming to light at that point.
Yeah.
But it would have very much been in the back of his mind, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so... that was
the time someone broke in and stole a plane.
Yeah. A bit of a different one.
So obviously he managed to access a plane in Darwin as well.
Yes.
Which presumably is a slightly bigger airport, but still not huge.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of access and availability do you think he would have had if he'd been in other states? And I'm like, I feel like the others would have been far less likely. Like I think that being rural...
Well, it depends. If it was a rural airport in Queensland, I don't think it would necessarily have been any different.
True.
If it was like Mount Isa or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have been much different at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Okay.
Probably would have been all that different.
But yeah, I don't think he would have had much accessibility to the bigger major airports.
No.
But I guess they probably have less smaller planes going in and out of them as well.
But yeah, so it's like the equivalent of breaking into one of those airports.
Rather than the big major one.
Yeah, than a big major one. And yeah, doing so in 2000 rather than 2024.
Yeah, with the fact that you can just use any key still blows my mind.
Yeah, that is...
I mean, I guess it was an aircraft.
And it also didn't go into like how old, like any details about the aircraft and how old the aircraft was or anything like that. So,
yeah.
Because, if it was 20 years old, it was on 1980s technology.
Yeah, which would highly likely that it was an older aircraft being a flying club aircraft that they use for just taking people out.
And sorry, did his recommendations talk in any way about like maybe we shouldn't offer trial flights to people?
Didn't go into any of that. Again, probably the backdrop of September 11th.
Yeah,
they stopped doing that anyway, right?
I don't know if that's going to be happening anymore.
Yeah. If you're getting in a plane, you're paying for a flying lesson.
Yeah. And you're getting some ID and background checks.
Yeah.
I actually don't know if they do background checks.
Or but like some ID.
But there would be some ID.
I want to know who you are.
Yeah.
I want to
they
record
would know
it for later.
And like not actually giving them the controls of the plane.
Yeah, that too.
And letting, how unsafe would that feel as a pilot?
Oh, yeah. That's like you're driving a car
and you've
got someone who's never driven before and you're like, you just quickly take the wheel for a second.
Yeah, you got
Although
this.
I guess we do that to poor driving instructors sometimes. But anyway, thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found it as interesting as I did in terms of looking back in time and how different society was back then, even though it was still within our lifetimes. Things have progressed so much, and as I said, not really relevant in terms of the recommendations or anything, because here's hoping that nothing like that would ever be able to happen in today's society, but an interesting one to listen to nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So hope you all have a good rest of your day, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.